Computers even promote creativity. The formerly dumb metal boxes are now experiencing a magical cell division. Computers keep producing new little computers, such as iPods. It is the grandchild of the legendary Walkman. It heralded the 21st century and has given us a new word. Broadcast became podcast. Its scrolling sound alone is an acoustic work of art. Now even compact discs are getting a bit long in the tooth, and DVDs are on their way out. One big reason is that music now comes from the internet, is downloaded onto our computers, and is administered and carried around from there too. We are all collectors and DJs.
It's wrong to believe that I can take a computer and the computer then makes the music. If you want to compose a string piece, you have to compose a string piece. The computer doesn't do that on its own. One big difference for me is the accordion and the voice, of course. These are breathing instruments. The computer breath is more of a humming and buzzing.
Eher ein Summ- und Surregeräusch.
Computer architecture is a structured landscape. The motherboard appears like Mother Earth to her data children. Imaginative people are invited to build an entire city from the term computer architecture. The software is constantly increasing. The hardware is getting smaller and smaller, and the possibilities seem endless. Although we brought this process about, we are also increasingly having problems with its effects.
With the help of computers, we can collect and process large quantities of data. This makes us believe that we can automatically solve problems with large quantities of data. Every time we face a problem, we collect more data, which means that we need more computer technology, more storage capacity, more programs to evaluate them. It's a fact that we can't solve anything that way. We're just increasing the size of our haystack instead of finding the needle, which is wisdom or knowledge.
Amongst the first information carriers were the Inca knotted strings that allowed their makers to remember something only they knew about. This individual memory is something a computer will never achieve. Today, the knowledge of others is a new problem area because hiding in the worldwide networks are countless duplicates and mistakes. The paperless society has not just got rid of the printer, but also the dictionary, with lasting effects.
Of course, I need a strategy of how to produce knowledge from information. That means I need superordinate concepts, which really should be taught to people. People should learn how to do research, how to test information for plausibility, how to compare information, and how to extract knowledge from it. If I find 10,000 items on a certain subject on the internet, 9,000 of them will be complete nonsense. Filtering out the 1,000 that are correct requires a superordinate strategy, and far too few people learn that.
Humanity has produced more than 32 million books to date, as well as an estimated 750 million articles. Compare that to 100 billion websites in just 16 years. Both analog and digital knowledge is being archived. Many thousands of bibliophile treasures are slumbering in the archives of the Austrian National Library. Using special scanners for delicate and precious materials, they can be conserved for the long term. This also creates a way to make information accessible to everyone in a fast and unbureaucratic manner. Proponents value this availability of knowledge. Critics call it a seduction into paperlessness that could lead to nothing. Transition affects analog and digital equally. Anyone questioning the durability of DVDs these days will justifiably point out the mortality of earlier data storage devices such as magnetic tape. The information in the World Wide Web was also quite short-lived in the first few years. After around 70 days, a lot of content was overwritten again. Now the Austrian National Library has become the place where information from the internet is stored. Historical analogue knowledge is being digitalised, and right next door, the transient medium that is the internet is getting an archive. The state also collects data from its citizens, who all have their own computers and are also collecting data. They all leave their marks.
Kaum einem Menschen ist bewusst,
Hardly anyone is aware how often they behave in a way that is formally suspect, which means that formally it corresponds to that of a drug runner, a mafia boss, or a terrorist. If we start recording these data traces and analysing them according to these formal criteria, we create a prevention society or an alibi society.
kommen wir in eine Präventivgesellschaft, in diese Alibi-Gesellschaft hinein.
More and more, we'll face the problem of having to justify behaviour that we really can't explain because it's so normal that we may not even be able to remember the circumstances where we behaved that way. If we create a society built of glass walls in which everyone has to toe a particular line, when we're all inconspicuous and we all conform, then we'll lose the ability to react to new challenges in the future.
In der alle nur noch unauffällig sind, in der sich alle nur mehr noch angepasst verhalten, dann werden wir irgendwann die Fähigkeit...
Then this society will collapse, like so many other societies that grew old and weren't capable of achieving anything new.
alt geworden sind und nicht mehr zu neuen fähig waren.
We have a love-hate relationship to our sat-nav systems that can't listen, which is typical of how we feel about computers. This new remote control for people demonstrates that while achievements take time, they quickly make us dependent. Captain Computer is the third man in the cockpit, and it almost seems as if he wanted to play the first fiddle. It has reduced the manual controls to a narrow strip between the pilot and co-pilot. But while our home computers are always up to date and constantly being updated, what about the onboard electronics in the cockpit? Surprisingly, they're not.
The computer technology in aeroplanes is older. That has several reasons. Firstly, these instruments have to be certified to be failure-proof. One large software manufacturer, for example, hasn't managed that yet. Secondly, these computers mustn't produce too much heat.
Terrain ahead.
Here in the flight simulator, we're being warned about dangers.
Terrain ahead.
What we're worried about are the digital contradictions.
The more you automate, the more you hand over to computers, the more you become unaware of what the machine is doing. A typical example is the incident in Warsaw. There are always two modes in the aeroplane, one for flight and one for on the ground. Different functions are enabled. You can't have reverse thrust in the air, for example. At the time, human intervention wasn't possible. The plane was firmly of the opinion that it was flying and wouldn't deploy the spoilers. That's been changed. You can now override the computer. You can reverse thrust and deploy the spoilers. The computers always point out errors, and they also assess their importance. In 2004, there was an incident with a freight plane in Baghdad. The plane was shot at, an engine caught fire, and the entire hydraulic controls were lost. The plane could only be controlled with the engines. The computer detected the engine fire, and if you let it, it would automatically shut that engine down. The plane would have crashed. We need people who can see the big picture and who have experience and who can trust their gut feelings to do things differently from what the computer logic is saying.
A digital organ failure is unlikely but possible.
At every level we can say this much automation is acceptable for these flying conditions, but we have to be able to reduce that all the way to manual flying without computer influence.
If he were a computer, would he trust the likes of himself?
A plane has several computers. If you have 3 computers, 2 are always monitoring the other, and as soon as 2 have the same signal, the third is switched off as having erroneous information. What we need is the ability to take over control at all times. because it can happen that two computers are both wrong at the same time, and the third, the one that is switched off, is the right one.
Could organised computers turn against people in a user-unfriendly way?
Computers that really do work independently could get the idea that people are troublemakers in this wonderful system and need to be eliminated.
Natursystem und die müssen wir jetzt ausschalten.
But we don't have to be worried. Without consciousness, computers don't have a memory or a soul, and they definitely don't have a will, so they won't harm us either. It's unfortunate that we even spend rainy Monday mornings while we're still half asleep doing our work, such as programming computers.
Material seems to me to be safer even so.
At the end of the story, we've come back to the beginning. The sound of the milk frother in our espresso machine is just like the one our old coffee maker made when it simply boiled water without any pressure. Mobile phones were already born in the filter coffee age. They break down our entire day into tiny fragments because we immediately react to every little change, altering our plans. Mobile phones, for you and me, have developed their own cultural history in just a quarter of a century. It's not just with televisions that the antenna has a nostalgic feel. We would like to know whether the next generation will have to call out an archaeologist when they find something like this, an old cassette that got stuck in a car's cassette player and was simply chucked away in the street. Only the good old fax has been allowed to age with dignity. It just won't die out. This hybrid between telephone and printer gives us necessities such as the ability to send original signatures and contracts. It also gives us one of the most absurd sounds, close to our pain barrier. When people closed Windows, they never used to think about clicking away icons on desktops. They thought about cold air coming in from the outside. Talking of which, our computers can catch cold too. The health of our computers has been under threat from viruses since their inception, and the mountains of rubbish don't stop at the world of computers either. Another new word, spam. The biggest danger lies in the expendable. Our computers are also players, and we are with them. We're never closer to our computers and more distant from our environment than we are when we're face to face with the interface. And if the parent generation gives up in frustration when it comes to the countless terms for plug-in connections, they can be consoled by the fact that Bluetooth was only the beginning of wirelessness. Plugs are being phased out. The new nonsense has just as little method as did the bad habits of the past, but it's spreading faster. Never before have people been doing this much research, and who would have thought in 1984 that we'd all send an average of 12 letters a day? Electronic mail can sometimes be faster than the sender's intentions, and the same is true for Facebook, where you can be friends with the rest of the world electronically. In the end, it's like a magazine subscription. We want to get rid of it, but we don't know how.
Deleting can also be pleasurable.
Esta segunda temporada viene con todo. Es un año candente porque es año de elecciones, pero aquí no vamos a hablar de candidatos. Aquí vamos a hablar de los temas que nos permitan pensar en el futuro, en el mundo y cada quien, si lo requiere, en las elecciones que vienen. Vamos a abordar todos los temas que sean necesarios para repensar nuestro mundo.